My name is Wendy O'Carroll, and I am the lady who was fortunate enough to be mother to Oliver Hellowell, a young man with Down syndrome who just happens to be an amazing photographer. My husband, Oliver's stepfather, is a photographer, and when we're out and about, it takes lots of photographs. And Oliver could see that he was taking photographs, liked the idea of being able to see the snapshot of something on the back of the camera and then on the computer afterwards. And he wanted to be able to do the same thing. He wanted to be like Mike, and he wanted to take pictures too. So he started with a bridge camera, but very quickly was not happy with that, because there's Mike walking around with his massive, great, heavy camera with a huge lens on it, and Oliver's thinking, well, I don't want this, I want that, I want what he's got. And so really started getting into photography, and we discovered very quickly that he had an eye. Again, his technical knowledge might not have been fantastic, but that didn't matter, because actually the most important thing in photography is having an eye and being able to have an idea of framing and composition and what it is that you're wanting to capture and show to other people. And I think photography became something which to him enabled him to show the world what he sees and how he sees it. And also gives him a lot of boost to his self-esteem and confidence when he sees how many people love his images and his pictures. Oliver having Down syndrome definitely has a significant effect on his photography, the way he uses a camera, the subject matter, and the framing and composition quite often. My husband, Oliver's stepfather, who taught Oliver photography, initially was sort of concentrating more on the technical side of photography and making sure Oliver knew all that, and would tell Oliver, for example, if you're looking at this landscape, you'd want to do this, this and this, and Oliver would go, no. And eventually would just keep saying, go away, go away. And just took pictures of what he wants to take pictures of. And he sees an awful lot more detail than other people do. He notices things that nobody else will notice. I'm looking at a vista. He's spotted a blade of grass that's got the sun shining on it. His eye is drawn by light and form and shape. He takes in and notices and brings to people's attention beauty that we are not noticing and have no idea is there. He also, for example, I can remember an instance when we were up on the Quantock Hills, and it was a rainy, miserable January or February day. Nothing's green and growing and pretty, and Oliver's buried in some undergrowth somewhere, taking ages. And I'm saying, can you come on? I'm cold, I want to go home. There can't be anything good there to take a picture of anyway. And he goes, look at this. He comes bounding through the ferns and shows me a picture in the viewfinder on the back of the camera of a torn, slug-eaten, gnarly bit of bramble leaf. And he said, look at it, isn't it beautiful? And I thought, gosh, if only we could all see the world the way Oliver sees it. Again, another example, I remember we went to a place that had some stone circle, and I'm expecting Oliver to be wanting to take some really cool pictures from the ground, looking up, and the kind of things he normally does all around this stone circle. And he's taking pictures of a tree that's over by the wall, and with a little fence next to it. And I said, don't you want to come and take pictures of the stone circle? And he said, no, look. And he'd noticed the way the wall arched and circled underneath the arch of the tree, and it was the shape and the form of that had caught his eye and was actually more interesting to him than the stone circle. So again, we can all learn from that, and quite often followers to his Facebook page, when I put up a set of photographs that he's taken when we visited somewhere, say, I loved visiting that place with you today. I've never been able to go there, but now I feel like I've been there, and I've seen things that I wouldn't have seen if I had actually been there myself. We've got some people who are older and who, for whatever reason, are no longer able to get out and about, who say, Oliver is my eyes. And that's wonderful, just absolutely wonderful. When I had just given birth to Oliver, initially the midwife who was delivering him thought everything was fine, there wasn't a problem, and it wasn't until the next day on the ward that a junior doctor came along and expressed some concerns, and then another doctor came along and expressed some more concerns, and then another doctor came along, and eventually later in the day somebody announced that they felt 95% certain that my baby had Down syndrome. And I was absolutely devastated. I thought my whole world had ended. My vision of Down syndrome was bleak and outdated, and I envisaged an unhappy life, and a life with a child that would never be happy, and that we as a family would never be happy, and that our future was black and white and monochrome and grey and sad, really, because my image of Down syndrome was so stereotypical and so outdated. And I envisaged somebody who would be not very nice to look at, who would be not able to speak properly, and wouldn't be able to live a full and enjoyable life. So I set out, but I adored him from the moment he was born. He was my baby right from the start. I can remember there was a moment in hospital when during the first night when I had him in a cot at the end of the bed, and I remember that when I'd had my daughter 8 years before, I had wanted her to be next to me, and I had brought the cot that had her in right next to my head, next to my bed. And I thought, well, it wouldn't make any difference to him because he won't know that anyway. He wouldn't be able to pick that up. And then it was as if I'd reached a crossroad and I could either have gone one way or the other. And I suddenly withdrew from that road and thought, no, actually, it's even more important. It's completely opposite. It's more important that he's close to me. And I actually took him out and took him into bed with me and thought, we need to be as close as we possibly can because this is even more important to him than it was to my daughter. And when he was 3 months old, we realised he was going to have open heart surgery, which is quite common. Up to 40-45% of children with Down syndrome are born with a cardiac defect. And I was terrified that I would lose him, absolutely terrified. And when he went to Bristol Hospital, where he had his open heart surgery with a wonderful, wonderful heart surgeon, I remember saying to the surgeon the night before when he introduced himself to us, "You won't take any less care, will you? Because he's got Down syndrome." I was worried that maybe he would think this life wasn't quite as valuable as another's. And he looked absolutely horrified and said, "Goodness me, no, I've operated on lots of babies with Down syndrome. Every child is precious." And I believed him, and he didn't let me down. Again, while I was in hospital, I saw other children who were very poorly in the intensive care ward. There was some children with leukemia who were dying of leukemia and who weren't going to be going home. And I thought, how dare you have felt so sorry for yourself when actually you're going to take your boy home and love him and have a life with him, and there's people here who will never take their child home. You know, how dare you feel so sorry for yourself? And it was at that point, I think, that I determined that not only was he going to survive, but he was going to be amazing. And it turned out he is. And I think as time has gone on, I've learned, I set out to learn a lot about Down syndrome. I didn't want to just have this stereotypical image in my head, which I began to realise quite quickly as I started to learn was incorrect and very out of date. And so I learned all about it. I learned about the way people with Down syndrome learn, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and thought I just need to find Oliver's strengths and weaknesses and work with his strengths and support him with his weaknesses. And very soon, you know, there's this blossoming, gorgeous, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, just gorgeous boy who we just completely adored and who really brought something tangibly valuable to our lives. And he helped me look at things differently. I think up until that point, my daughter was 8 when my son was born, and I'd thought for her it was really important that she did well at school and that she looked nice. And then I realised, actually, once I realised that for Oliver the most important thing wasn't how clever he was, I sort of realised that actually that wasn't the most important thing for my daughter Anna either, and that actually there were other things that were much, much more important in life. So it changed my priorities, what I view as most important, not just for Oliver, but actually for my daughter and for general life as well. So I have learned so much more from Oliver than he has learned from me. I think today people still have a very old-fashioned stereotypical view of Down syndrome. In fact, I think of all the conditions that are around and exist, I think perhaps Down syndrome is the one that has the most significant stereotype, possibly because there are visual, one can tell usually one can tell from looking at a person with Down syndrome that they have Down syndrome. And perhaps because that is noticeable, that is what has contributed to people having such a stereotypical view of the condition. They've lumped all these people together and decided that that is what they are like. And this is what they can do and this is what they can't do. And it's simply not the case, because the range of ability and personality amongst people with Down syndrome is just as vast as the range of ability and personality within the ordinary population. I always use the word ordinary, never normal, because, who on earth knows what normal is anyway? So, there are lots of ordinary people out there, and there are people who have Down syndrome and maybe other conditions. But people with Down syndrome, I do feel, have an intrinsic strength. There is something about, perhaps it's their vulnerability. In the past, people have referred to it as having an innocence that lasts forever. I wouldn't call it an innocence, but I think there is a vulnerability about their living for now.
Come on, hurry up.
Not really caring an awful lot about yesterday.
So this is my map?
Not really caring an awful lot about tomorrow or in 10 minutes' time either, really. I want my sandwich and I need it now. And just Oliver's way of looking at life is much more in the now. It's much more immediate. And his priorities and things that are important to him are not necessarily the things that are important to you and I. And quite often, we can learn a lot from that. And Oliver's eye for detail, the things that Oliver finds beautiful are different to the things that you and I find beautiful. And that is actually really very healthy in lots of ways. I think even today the stereotype is still the fact that people with Down syndrome will not be very able, they will be stupid. People tend to think, especially young people tend to think, that people with Down syndrome are likely to be stupid, that their speech is intelligible and very difficult to understand, which makes them sound perhaps more foolish. Physically, they're not going to be nearly as able and therefore are going to be clumsy, because people with Down syndrome have poor muscle tone, which makes physical things more difficult and more tiring, and they're not quite as speedy at processing as ordinary people are. So there are a whole lot of very unfavourable, unpleasant stereotypes, I think, that are still associated with the condition. And I enjoy talking to young people, actually, and saying, hey, come on, ask me your questions. Let's sort this out. Tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what really is the case. For example, I remember going in to a secondary school where there was a young lady with Down syndrome, and talking to her peers as they decided they wanted to know a little bit more about the condition, and I was invited in to talk to them and answer their questions. And one of the things that some of the young girls said to me was, we like to go to cinema at the weekends, and we quite like to invite X to come along with us, but maybe what if she doesn't understand the plot of the film, really doesn't really understand the storyline, maybe that wouldn't really work for her. What do you think? And I said, let me turn this question back to you. When you go to the cinema, what's the bit that you enjoy the most? Is it the getting the popcorn, sitting in the back row, nattering with your friends, spotting which good-looking boys you think are in the row in front of you, or talking about somebody at school, and just enjoying the general being there at the cinema? Is that what you enjoy most, or is it the plot and the subtext of the film? And she said, oh yeah, okay, right, I get that. And then very happily took their friend to the cinema, and she used to go out with them quite often then at the weekends. It's just helping people ask their questions, perfectly valid questions, and being able to answer them. And sometimes I remember another student asking me about a young man with Down syndrome who used to just sort of stand there while they were talking, and it made them feel a little bit awkward, and they would try to sometimes involve him in the conversation, but he didn't really seem to readily immerse himself in the conversations that they were having. And he said, it makes us feel a bit awkward. You don't really know what he's, perhaps he's not happy, perhaps he's not enjoying himself with us. And I said, the thing is, he's actually really enjoying just being there with you and listening to what you're saying and listening to your conversation. When you're trying to involve him, what you need to remember is that when somebody says to you, hi Dave, how was your weekend? In an instant, you will answer with a whole load of information that you decide is appropriate. When you say to your friend with Down syndrome, hi, how was your weekend? First, he's got to remember all the things that he did and that happened at the weekend. Then he's got to work out which of those you might think are cool or interesting. Then he's got to work out exactly which words he needs to use to explain that to you, put them in the right order and try and make it grammatically correct. And then he's got to make sure that he speaks those words as clearly as he possibly can, so that you understand what he's saying. I said, you do all that in an instant, in a lightning bolt, in a flash of a second. He has to think about all those things. So actually, it's much easier for him to go, yeah, fine. My weekend was fine. To come back with 1 or 2 word answers is easier for him. Doesn't mean he doesn't want to be part of the conversation. It just means that actually that's such a lot to do to give you the kind of answer that you're all giving each other. So the way you can help him is by breaking down your question, and rather than saying, how was the weekend? That's massive. That's a massive amount of processing required. It could be, for example, if this young man happens to be somebody who is sometimes staying at his dad's at the weekend or at his mum's, you could start by saying, hi, where were you this weekend? And he can say, and, did you go out? And then he can, so by breaking it down into smaller sections, if you like, that helps him contribute and pass that information across to you, and enjoy your company as much as you're enjoying his. These people help to keep us human. I think it's important that we know it isn't right to strive for perfection, and it isn't best to strive for perfection, because value is not necessarily found in what is perceived to be normal or perfection, that actually we all learn from our young people and our people with disabilities. We learn to be more understanding. We learn to be more patient. We learn to perhaps be more supportive and more helpful. And I feel and I believe that actually young people who have grown up in mainstream schools with young people with Down syndrome and other disabilities are more rounded, generous, thoughtful, pleasant individuals than they might otherwise have been, because it has made them think about what they can do themselves and what maybe their friend or peer with a disability might not be able to do, and quite often look at ways that they can actually support their friend, and also how fortunate we are that we can do all the things that we want to do, and not that the other people are less fortunate, but that they are finding value in other things, and so that helps us find value in other things too. There's a brilliant cartoon that I use sometimes when I'm working with students, where there's a group of boys who are saying, look at poor old Harry, he's stuck with an assistant all day, they're watching him all the time. And he says to one of his mates, you distract her and I'll grab Harry. And then so somebody starts talking to the assistant, and a mate goes and grabs Harry, who happens to be in a wheelchair, and wheels him off, and they run away with him and do something they obviously shouldn't be doing. Ordinary kids get the chance to do stuff they shouldn't be doing. Our kids don't get that chance because they've got somebody on their shoulder all the time. And I love the idea of that sort of collusiveness, that ordinary kids are thinking, what can we do to make his life cool and help him to do the stuff that we're doing. When I work with primary school children, I often describe having a disability as journeying along a slightly different road. So I say to them, so you, for example, when you're learning to ride a bike or learning about the Romans or whatever, that's like a set journey, a set path. You're starting at the beginning of this road, you don't know how to ride your bike, you don't know anything about the Romans, and by the time you get to the end of that road, you've learnt to ride your bike, you've learnt to play hockey, or you've learnt all about the Romans. The person with Down syndrome has to walk exactly the same road. They want to learn exactly the same thing that you're learning, but the difference is that your road is straight and clear and bright, and their road has got a foggy bit. It's got a bit of an old brick wall they've got to climb over at some point. There's a few holes in the road they've got to navigate their way around. So if your straight, easy road was next to the road of somebody who actually was trying to do the same, but their road was much harder than yours, you have more time than they do. Would you not hop across and give them a leg up over that wall? Would you not say, come on, we'll go through this foggy bit together, I've got a flashlight? It's the principle is that actually we are all better people for wanting to involve ourselves and help other people in this world. And if we lose that, we lose something that's very basic and valuable and important to us as humans. There's been an awful lot of research and media coverage recently, over the last couple of years in particular, about new antenatal testing. And there has always been, for a long, long time, there has been antenatal testing available, but it has been invasive, which means that actually it carries a very small risk of miscarriage to the mother if she decides to go ahead with the testing. But they're now raving about the fact that there will be and is non-invasive antenatal screening available, and the reason this is perceived to be so brilliant and to have been worth the years and the millions of pounds spent on the research is that this would help more children with Down syndrome to be terminated and never to be born. There are some countries like Denmark, for instance, who are greeting this so enthusiastically. They're actually very happily saying and promoting the fact that they are hoping to, and I use their words, eradicate Down syndrome by the year 2035. And all this media coverage and the fact that every pregnant woman is offered testing carries with it a very insidious and heavy implication that obviously you wouldn't want to have a baby with Down syndrome if you knew, would you? So we're making sure that we can find out for you so that you can have the choice to terminate. And this is because as a society, we still have a very outdated view of what is seen as valuable in a person and what people bring to the world and to our communities and to our society. And it is still unfortunately the case that people see Down syndrome and people with Down syndrome as a burden to their families and to their communities. And that's just such a sad thing, because those of us who are actually on the pit face, if you like, we're actually here, we have children with Down syndrome, are really very happy people and enjoying our children. It's as if we know the secret that you don't. And that's very difficult to articulate and make people aware. When I do presentations and things, I compare it to the fact that if you have a child and you try to explain to somebody who doesn't have a child what that's like, there are no words. You can't actually really explain to you can't make somebody who has never had a child feel what it is like to have a child and be a parent. There are no words for that. It's something you actually have to feel and experience for yourself. And this is the same, to be able to explain to somebody who has a child, an ordinary child, what it's like to have a child with Down syndrome. There are no words. There aren't words or phrases or things that I could say to you to help you really know what it feels like to be me. And I know that not all mothers feel the same, but if somebody came along with a magic wand and said to me, I could take Oliver's Down syndrome away, I would honestly, hand on heart, say, good heavens no, why would I want that? Because if you took Oliver's Down syndrome away, he would be a completely different person. Down syndrome is woven into the very fabric of his being and is a very big part of what makes him who he is. And I'm really very happy with who he is and who I have. I don't want another son. I don't want a different son. After imagining that our lives would be black and white and grey, he has brought more colour to my life and our lives than we could possibly have imagined. And he brings value to the people he knows and who know him. There is an intrinsic value to having Oliver in my life that I would have missed and never known about had he not had Down syndrome. But it's very difficult to help people understand that, because obviously Down syndrome does come with its challenges. But hey, I have a daughter who doesn't have Down syndrome, and I can assure you when she was a teenager she had quite a few challenges that she brought as well. So there are lots of challenges to be faced by ordinary children and young people, and not just children with Down syndrome. It's just the challenges are maybe a little different. I remember a few years ago when Oliver was sort of 18, 19, I had a friend who had a son that was the same age as Oliver, didn't have Down syndrome, didn't have any perceived problems. He was perceived to be normal or perfect, and he'd got in with the wrong crowd. He was, unfortunately got into drug taking, and they were worried that he was starting to get involved in petty crime. And my friend was beside herself with concern and worry for him and what was going on, and he was heading down a road that actually was quite possibly could have ended up costing society an awful lot more than my son, who couldn't wait till I got home to ask me what I'd done at work today and couldn't wait to show me the photographs that he'd taken. So actually, out of those two young people, who was more of a burden to society? The people who end up in prison. There are no people with Down syndrome in prison. They're not costing society nearly as much, I think, as people imagine that they are. And actually they're bringing a lot to society and to the people that they are with. My son went to mainstream primary school. There are a whole load of children and young people there who are growing up into adults who will never be nearly as frightened or worried about Down syndrome as people who haven't been exposed, if you like, to Down syndrome, and who absolutely adored Oliver and loved Oliver for who he is. He forms attachments with people that ordinary young people don't. He did motor vehicle maintenance at college for a couple of years, and the guy who was his tutor just found him such an amazing and wonderful person that he now comes and takes him out one day a week, and he's got himself the same camera that Oliver's got, because he wants Oliver to teach him how to take pictures like him, and gets very upset when they've both stood and taken pictures of the same thing and Oliver's pictures are better than his. So I just wish that there were words I could use that would help people know the secret that I know, and that so many of us know, that actually children with Down syndrome and people with Down syndrome bring something very, very special to our lives, and they aren't burdened, they're not suffering. The phrase in the news is always suffers from Down syndrome. My son doesn't suffer, he's having a ball. I think the fear about this is that we're heading down a slippery slope, I suppose is the phrase that I would use, because once you start to decide that it's okay to change, alter people, to make them in the way that a perceived few decide would be better for them and or for society, you're heading down a dangerous road. It's down to somebody's opinion what is good and what is bad. It's down to somebody's opinion what is valuable and what is not valuable. I'm aware that there are tests now that they're starting to be able to perhaps tell whether somebody might be more susceptible to becoming autistic from brain scans that can be carried out while the baby is still in the womb. So would that then mean that we'll start to say to people, you can terminate your baby because there's a possibility that they will develop autism? It's a scary road. If you're looking to actually start to remove people of certain types from the population, that starts to sound like something that happened historically, about somebody deciding that there are whole groups and sets of people that should be removed from the population and shouldn't be allowed life, and that makes me scared. I think that we are striving for, as a society, as a world, we are starting even more now to strive for what we perceive to be perfection or normality. We want our children to be beautiful and clever, and so that somehow that will make society such a much better place. They will have much better lives, and everybody will be happy, and they won't cost us nearly as much money as other children who maybe have needs, and it just doesn't work out that way in real life. So my fear is that people are going to start to think that they can choose, that they have a right to choose exactly what kind of child they want to have. I think I want to say to you that I understand completely that when you reach the age where you're having children or wanting to have children, that what you will want more than anything is what you see as being the perfect child. And I wish that somehow I could help you understand that actually every child is perfect. Every child is different, and every child is an individual. And your child, whatever or whoever they turn out to be, will bring you such joy and pride. And just occasionally, actually, the child that you're not expecting to bring you that will be the child that will bring you more of that than you could possibly have imagined. And I desperately hope that all you wonderful young people turn out to be the people that will rebel against these old fogies who have decided the right thing to do is try to make everybody the same and perfect and the most able, when actually that is not the most important thing for us, for our future and for your future.